Ajoanu began to slowly round the wrestling square as a distraction to buy some time to regain his lost strength. But the seven-headed spirit gave him no room for such as he launched another attack on him. His timing was right at this time. He gripped Ajoanu, spun him around, and flung him away. Ajoanu quickly got hold of himself and tried to land safely, but the force pushed him to collide with other spirits that were standing and spectating. The king of the spirits, who was in complete anger, signaled his guards. The guards quickly marched towards Odinaka and seized him. All drumming came to a stop. Immediately, Ajoanu was pushed back into the wrestling square to face his nightmare by those spirits he had earlier collided with. He stared in horror as his brother was being led away by the guards. Once upon a time, in the land of Umudike, a village blessed with great wrestlers and massive wealth, the sun shone upon the village, bringing forth her beauty, which was dotted with thatched roofs of huts, greenery, flowers, and trees that blended so magnificently into the natural landscape. Two men are wrestling in the village wrestling square. The wrestling was so intense and full of suspense. The villagers watched with so much interest to know who was going to be defeated. One of the wrestlers struggled with all his strength to throw his opponent on the sandy ground. But oh, his opponent was stronger and more skilled than him. A young man began to beat his drum. His drum beats grew louder and more vibrant. In no time, the entire villagers began to dance to the rhythm of the beautiful melody produced by his drumming. Even the elderlies, who were too old to dance, could not resist the infectious rhythm as they began to clap their hands and tap their feet. Suddenly, the struggling wrestler was thrown to the ground. The whole villagers burst into loud glorious shouts of joy which touched the very heavens. In a moment, the shouts of joy quickly turned into annoying laughter, channeled at the defeated man who was still lying down on the ground. This man shook his head in shame at his defeat because earlier before the match began, he had arrived from a village which was 5 villages away with golds and gifts, bragging that his opponent cannot defeat him in a wrestling match. Ajoanu, a tall black muscular man of late 20s, was a wrestler who was born strong with a high wrestling skills straight from the gods, whose back had never touched the ground in more than hundreds of wrestling matches he had participated in within and outside his village. Ajoanu, who had just added yet another victory on that day, walked closer to his defeated opponent, who was still on the ground in shame. He extended his hand. All noises and drumming were silenced. "You wrestled extremely very well," Ajoanu said. His hand still stretched out to the man, who slowly looked up at him and grabbed his hand. Ajoanu pulled him up and shared some portions of his dusty and sandy body as he embraced him. The villagers threw more annoying laughter. These were the kinds of laughter that melted anyone who got beaten in a wrestling match by this god of wrestling. Immediately, Odinaka, a younger brother to Ajoanu, had introduced another infectious drum beat, which made the whole atmosphere filled with the sweet scents of dancing bodies and the joyous sounds of the villagers singing to the rhythm of the drum beat as they rushed out towards Ajoanu, lifting him off the ground and landing him upon their shoulders in celebration for his victory. Odinaka, a great young man who was born with a special skill in the act of drumming, so much loved beating his drum. The sweet melody that always came out of his drum whenever he skillfully played would trigger even the spirits to go out of their way and dance. Odinaka's love for his brother made him to always be with him and to always beat his drum whenever he was in a wrestling match. His drumming always made Ajoanu energetic to defeat any of his opponents in a wrestling match. Many of the villagers had even attributed Ajoanu's victories to Odinaka's drumming skill. Ajoanu's name had become very famous among all the villages, both far and near, which made no one to ever dare him in a wrestling match. After many months had passed, no one ever wished to wrestle with Ajoanu anymore. During any wrestling match, Ajoanu would come out of the wrestling square expecting an opponent, but all the wrestlers would just shy away. It was better to stay shy than to live the rest of your life shamefully. This had become the slogan of all the wrestlers in Umudike. This gave Ajoanu serious concern because wrestling was his hobby. Wrestling was all he wanted to be doing. So, one day, he and Odinaka gathered many villagers together. He told them that anyone who could beat him in a wrestling match, that he, Ajoanu, would reward such a person with many goals, 2 baskets filled to the brim with gifts and money. But still, no one ever dared to try him. Each time any of the wrestlers thought about the laughter and the shameful disgrace that would greet him at the end of his defeat, the beauty of the rewards became an eyesore to them. The wrestlers saw this as Ajoanu's trap to throw them into more disgrace. But to Ajoanu, win or defeat mattered not to him anymore. Ajoanu was so troubled after many more market days had passed, and yet not a soul dared accept his challenge. This gave him more serious concern. So, one fateful day, he and his brother decided to journey to a very far away land where they felt that the story of his glory had not yet been soiled, in search of a worthy wrestler who would agree to wrestle with him. They set out on this journey, but they were met with a great shock of their lives that even the villages many miles away had gotten to hear or know about him. They came back to their village very disappointed. On one of Ajoanu's strolling around the village busy areas with his brother, he came upon the village chief priest telling some of the villagers the kind of wrestling match he witnessed in the land of the spirits, as he narrated. In my entire life, I have never witnessed the kind of wrestling I was privileged to see in the land of the spirits by the gods. I opened both eyes in surprise. I must say, no mortal can ever wrestle with those spirits and get a victory. And I will be willing to journey to the land of the spirits and become the first mortal to wrestle with them, Ajoanu said, without even having a second thought about his decision. He and Odinaka walked closer to the chief priest, standing with other small group of villagers who murmured at what he had just said. And that doesn't mean you will get a victory, my son. Bury such an idea. That land is nothing like ours. The chief priest quickly responded to dissuade him from further hashing his idea. But Ajoanu was already determined, as his mind was completely made up, as though he had been wishing for a day to be greeted with such an opportunity. The next day, Ajoanu and his brother met with the chief priest to inquire on how he would journey to the mysterious land. They sat with the chief priest in front of his hut. The chief priest tried all he could to talk him out of this dangerous adventure, but Ajoanu was not ready to have a second thought. So, the chief priest, seeing that there was nothing he could do to have him change his mind, then told him to appear before him on the 3rd market day, fully prepared for the journey, but warned him seriously that whatever happens to him was clearly out of his own stubbornness. Then told him that no mortal has ever journeyed to the land of the great beyond and returned with his life, nor his corpse ever seen. Ajoanu nodded his head in agreement and left with his brother. In no time, he summoned his men together and broke this ugly and heartbreaking news of him going to the land of the spirits for a wrestling match. They all stared at him like one crazy fellow. You are beginning to go insane. The hundreds of victories you have earned in all your wrestling days cannot be equaled to this silly decision of yours today. I am sorry, I will not journey with you. said one of his men as he exited himself. The rest of his men all declined his offer to journey with him, exiting the scene one after the other, leaving only Odinaka, who stood firm. Ajoanu looked at Odinaka and said, "You know, you are not going on this journey with me this time around. It is very dangerous. Our mother cannot lose two of her only children in one day if we do not return." Odinaka smiled at him. "You have the strength of a lion. Yes, I know. You have the skill of a squirrel climbing an Iroko tree in a wrestling match. Yes, I know. But who will cheer you up to victory in the land of the spirit? Who will play you the drum that will make you remember home and drive you to victory?" Who? Who? Odinaka asked. Both brothers stood, staring at each other for a moment. Ajoanu found himself in a corner of not knowing what to respond for the first time in his life. Odinaka continued, "You see, you need at least one man who can come home and at least tell of your story if you feel that the gods of our land will desert you. The gods do not guard a foolish man's decision," Ajoanu jokingly said as he laughed. Odinaka joined him in laughter and said, "Leave that for the gods. Only them decide what is foolishness or not." Immediately, the news of Ajoanu's journey to the land of the spirits to wrestle with them had spread like wildfire, blazing in the dry forest all through the land of Umudike and beyond. Anyone who heard of the news would come either to advise or beg him not to endanger his life, but he still stood his ground in his decision. His mother and kinsmen pleaded with him not to embark on this his planned journey, but all advices and pleadings fell on deaf ears. His determination to have a chance to test his ability with those beyond was all he wanted, as he said to himself, "Since no man wants to wrestle with me anymore, let me try those in the other world." On the third day, he and Odinaka returned to the chief priest's shrine, well prepared as they were instructed. The chief priest lifted a pot and performed some rituals and presented to Ajoanu 2 black eggs and said, "One of these eggs is for your entrance into the spirit world. It will open an ancient door between humans and spirits. You must smash the egg in a thick forest. Once any of these eggs is smashed, the world of the spirits will be unlocked and the door will appear and open. It will immediately close once you both have fully entered. Do the same with the second egg on your way back home. That is, if you are lucky enough to make it back alive. May the gods forgive your foolishness and may they also be with you." He said, Ajoanu said, as he took both eggs from the chief priest and put them safe in a small bag around his waist. He and Odinaka set out on this journey. They had both reached the thickest part of the forest. Ajoanu brought out one of the eggs and smashed it on the ground. Shockingly, a big rocky and scary rounded hole appeared before them. It was engulfed with a thick dark smoke emanating from the entrance, so that no one could see what was on the other side of the wall. They looked at each other and walked into the thick smoke. On the other side was the world of the spirits, a world filled with clouded darkness. Wooden torches and scary objects hung on the walls. The torches lightened up the roads. They began to walk along the scary path. They were immediately encircled by dozens of ugly creatures that guarded the path between the humans and that of the spirits. These beasts held spears, arrows, log of woods, and many more weapons. "What has the mortals come to do in the land of the spirits?" asked one of the guards. "We have heard tales of your kind being unbeatable in a wrestling match. I have come for a wrestling match," replied Ajoanu. The spirits exchanged surprised glances at one another. Ajoanu and his brother were led to the king, who was in shock as he said, "What brought you mortals to step your feet into the land of the immortals? Do you not have fears? We do not seek fight nor bloodshed. I only came for a wrestling match, for we have heard many tales of your kind's superior wrestling skills, which I have come to challenge and to disapprove." Ajoanu said. All the spirits laughed except their king, who continued to stare at Ajoanu. No mortal has ever dared enter their territory, wishing for a wrestling match. So he decided to teach Ajoanu and his brother a bitter lesson of their lives. "Summon 7 of our best wrestlers," the king said. One of the guards quietly said, "These mortals do not deserve such an honor. The one-headed wrestler is enough to finish this mortal." "Yes, yes, yes," other guards echoed in agreement. The king said, "Their boldness is what I want to deal with. Bring 7 of the best wrestlers according to the number of their heads." He paused as he stared at Ajoanu. "If you lose, you are dead," said the king. "And if I win?" Ajoanu asked, leaning forward, but the king ignored him and signaled that Ajoanu and his brother should be led to the wrestling square, which was wide and dotted with burning torches hanging to illuminate it. Many other spirits of different sizes, heights, looks, and those with no heads, and those with one eye, and many more had already gathered to watch these thrilling wrestling matches between the human and the spirits. Ajoanu and Odinaka stood in the wrestling square. In no time, the 7 wrestlers began to queue into the wrestling square according to the number of their heads, from one-headed spirit to the one with 2 heads. Ajoanu and his brother were in great shock. They have never seen these kinds of creatures in their entire life. Before the spirit with the 7 heads had entered, goose pimple was already raining down on Ajoanu's body. Ajoanu saw that this was not going to be an easy one for him this time around, quickly brought out the second egg and slipped it into Odinaka's waist bag. "You must guard it with your life," Ajoanu said in a slight trembling voice. Odinaka nodded his head in agreement. It was clear to him as well that the odds of winning this wrestling match was already against them. He quickly found a perfect spot for himself. He sat down, pulled down his drum. He began to display his talent, beating the drum so magnificently. Ajoanu and the one-headed spirit stood in the wrestling square, ready to hit it out. Shortly, the wrestling match began. The spirit effortlessly wrestled Ajoanu as both got entangled. Shortly after, they disengaged from each other. Ajoanu stepped back and danced around to the vibrant rhythm of Odinaka's drumbeat. Shaking off his fears, he launched himself again at the beast, lifting him up and smashing him hard on the ground. Odinaka was greatly relieved and extremely excited as he hit his drum more and more. Shortly, the 2-headed spirit quickly rushed into the wrestling square, giving Ajoanu no time to rest nor to recover his lost strength. Ajoanu faced him again. Another wrestling match began. Odinaka still worked his magic with his hands as the wrestling grew more intense, with the spirit and the human struggling to emerge the victor. Again, the 2-headed spirit was defeated. Odinaka, in more excitement, introduced another vibrant drumbeat. Ajoanu danced around the square. It seemed he had managed to overcome his fears. In no time, the 3-headed spirit quickly rushed out. Again, another wrestling match began. Ajoanu still was not allowed to take a rest as he faced this scary monster. The spirit was far from the 2 others Ajoanu had earlier defeated. He was more powerful and tactful. It seemed the more the number of their heads, the more powerful they are. Again, Ajoanu recorded another victory. The atmosphere continued to blaze with the rhythm of Odinaka's vibrant drumbeat, which could even raise the dead. Ajoanu had also defeated the 4-headed spirit, the 5-headed spirit, the 6-headed spirit, remaining the 7-headed spirit, who was already in the wrestling square. Ajoanu was tired and worn out. Odinaka was still working wonders with his hands, beating his drum as if his whole life depended on it. The 7-headed spirit seized upon Ajoanu's distraction and tiredness and attacked him, aiming for his legs, but Ajoanu quickly stepped out of the way, causing the 7-headed spirit to lose his footing with his rush as he nearly tumbled. The other spirit gasped in surprise, but then the 7-headed spirit quickly regained his balance. Odinaka blazed another vibrant drumbeat, which was Ajoanu's best, as though he knew to keep the best for the last. Ajoanu began to slowly round the wrestling square as a distraction to buy some time to regain his lost strength, but the 7-headed spirit gave him no room for such as he launched another attack on him. His timing was right at this time. He gripped Ajoanu, spun him around and flung him away. Ajoanu quickly got hold of himself and tried to land safely, but the force pushed him to collide with other spirits that were standing and spectating. The king of the spirits, who was in complete anger, signaled his guards. The guards quickly marched towards Odinaka and seized him. All drumming came to a stop. Immediately, Ajoanu was pushed back into the wrestling square to face his nightmare by those spirits he had earlier collided with. He stared in horror as his brother was being led away by the guards. At that time was when he remembered what the chief priest had told him, that no mortal had returned from the land of the spirits alive, nor his corpse ever seen. He now came to realization that this was not just a wrestling match like he thought, that this was a pure battle, and so he must give his best. He then turned to the 7-headed spirit and roared like an angry lion, finally facing this monster, as both are slowly rounding each other, looking for an opportunity to launch an attack. But the 7-headed spirit had eyes all around his 7 heads, which was an advantage for him to see all Ajoanu's moves. Finally, Ajoanu saw an opening. Bam! He launched himself at the 7-headed spirit. With all his strength, he began to throw dozens of punches at the monster's face. These spirits had opened the door for battle, and he was not going to die without a fight. The dozens of punches landed on the monster gave Ajoanu an opportunity to lift him up and slam him hard on the ground. The impossible has been done on this very day. The other spirits gazed with a mixture of astonishment, anger, and sadness. This has never happened in their land before. Before Ajoanu could stand on his feet, the spirit guards landed on him as their king had commanded. He was then forced to his knees. The king of the spirits, in rage, commanded that Ajoanu should be thrown into the prison with his brother, and the two of them should be brought to his secret room the next day. Ajoanu shouted upon his voice, "Before the wrestling match began, I had earlier said that I did not seek for a fight nor bloodshed, only wrestling, where each party could return home fulfilled. Take me and free my brother," he shouted as he was being dragged away. The king signaled his guards to stop. He then said, "You have done the impossible today. The story of your victory remains here. Your people will not hear of this victory, or they will see us as weak. Take him out." Ajoanu was dragged away and thrown into a prison, but he was worried because he didn't see his brother in the prison. In the middle of the night, Odinaka quietly opened the prison door where Ajoanu was being held. The two brothers hugged each other tightly. "We must go now. They are busy gathering woods, which I believe will be used on us," said Odinaka. Two of them hurried out of the prison and began to run as fast as their leg could carry them. Not so long, the news of their escape quickly broke loose. All the guards swung into hot pursuit at them. The king of the spirits was enraged as he was informed that his prisoners had escaped. He quickly grabbed his royal staff and disappeared. These two brothers had reached the spot where they had entered the land of the spirits. Odinaka handed the second egg to Ajoanu, who wasted no time in smashing the egg on the ground. The ancient door appeared and opened. Behind him were the guards, swinging their weapons in hot pursuit. They quickly ran into the ancient door and came out into the world of the humans. The guards were angry and frustrated at this. As the ancient door was about to disappear, the king of the spirits appeared before it and stamped his royal staff in front of it, preventing the door from disappearing. He and his guards stood there and stared at Ajoanu and Odinaka, who quickly walked away. Ajoanu and his brother reached Umudike. They were immediately crowded by the villagers, who came to celebrate their victory from the land of the spirits. Drum beats and music filled the air.